Knew it was. I knew it, but I was still running my, still running my mind. Oh, yeah.
All right, hello everybody. How y'all doing?
Fabulous.
Good. All right, so we'll call our, I guess it's education session. So we just go ahead and get started. This education session is about the One Westside plan, which includes the BIN with Urban Store Ventures, as well as the Housing Authority and Hamilton County Schools. So I see Jimmy just came in. I see the Charles and Betsy and everyone here. So we'll go ahead and get started. And there is a presentation from Columbia Residential, who is the developer for this plan. So we'll go ahead and get started. I guess Jermaine, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, and so thanks everyone for being here. In addition to Columbia Residential, we also have attorneys from Bassberry and Sims that will also be here. Betsy Knotts is here from Bassberry Sims office. Mark Mamontoff should be here momentarily. We also have representation from the Chattanooga Housing Authority, as well as Urban Story Ventures that's here, as well as the Chattanooga Chamber of Commerce. So we will go ahead and get started. And so the first part of this will be sort of a recap of last week. I just wanted to make sure that everybody has sort of a good handle on the numbers that we're throwing out here, as well as the process. And so as of right now, what we are imagining is a 20-year brownfield TIF that would allocate about $115 million in the form of property tax, incremental property tax revenue and sales tax revenue. So $100 million comes from the real property tax revenue that's split between the city and county, and then $15 million comes from new incremental local option sales tax revenue that only comes from the city. And the reason that only comes from the city is because under state law, the city is required to use its portion of local option sales tax to continue to fund public education. So there is no local option sales tax component for the county for that reason. This is, again, the area that we're discussing today. So we are discussing the Bend, which is right next to the west side. As we had conceptualized this TIF, the TIF district would include the Bend footprint. And then what we would do is allocate funding to the Chattanooga Housing Authority through intergovernmental agreements, as well as allocate funding to Hamilton County Schools for the Downtown Career and Technical Education Center. These are some additional community benefits that we've been able to negotiate. So within the footprint of the Bend itself, there would be 10% of their units would be affordable to people at 80% AMI or less. We would utilize DBEs for contracting for at least 30% of contracts. All of the commercial office space would be built to LEED Silver standards. All of the park space, which is about 14 acres, would be dedicated to the city. All of the public infrastructure would also be dedicated to the city, although it would be initially maintained by Urban Story Ventures for the first few years. And then Urban Story Ventures would also work to create something similar to a business improvement district or something similar to it. And then there would also be many multimodal connectivity improvements. I know that some of you have also reached out and expressed some interest in seeing multimodal improvements as well done to the downtown Gateway site school. And so that's something that we also will be thinking about as we move through this process and move through the economic impact plan to make sure that as people, if the Gateway site is of course on the opposite side of ML King Boulevard. So we want to make sure that we are facilitating the easy movement of people across the road to utilize the school. So here's how we have imagined this TIF, which is unique because we've never done a TIF like this in terms of the pro rata splits of the dollars. So you all are typically familiar with the normal split in which the city keeps around 40% of its increment. That is the case that we've done on most of our TIFs, not all of them, but on most of our TIFs, the city has kept 40% of its increment, and then roughly 59% or somewhere thereabouts is dedicated to the TIF or made available to the developer. This is a unique TIF in that this imagines that the developer, which is the second line where it says 27% to the TIF, the developer is getting substantially less of a percentage than they would under a normal TIF. So in a normal TIF where they would get closer to 60%, the city would protect and reserve its 40% for the general fund, which is used for debt service. We would dedicate about 27% to the TIF, 19.8% of the funding to the Chattanooga Housing Authority, 7% to help the county with the Downtown Career and Technical Education Center. The city would retain an additional 4% to fund the construction of a future fire station, and then there would be about 2.5% dedicated to IDB administrative fees. Now, this pro rata split is only for the city's portion. This does not include the county's portion of the TIF, and this is only for the property taxes. On the sales tax, we would do something similar in that we would take half of the local option sales tax revenue that we have and make it available to the TIF. Then we would take a quarter of it and send it to the general fund, and the other quarter and dedicate it to the city's affordable housing fund. And again, this just, go ahead, Madam Vice Chair.
Is this a change from last week?
It's not, we just didn't get this into this level of detail.
Okay,
Right, right.
Jermaine, can I add something?
so this is of the 15 million.
Correct.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's capped at 15.
It's capped at 15 million, so
And after that, then
after that, that's correct, thank you, Mr. White. So after they reach $15 million, then everything comes back to the general fund and to the city's affordable housing fund. Councilman Ledford, you had a question?
I did. Would you label this as kind of a TIF light hybrid situation?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, there's the developer, you know, we've worked very hard with the developer to reach an arrangement and an agreement in which we could make as much funding available for public goods and for public purposes, and also make sure that we protect the city's interests in the process, but also help the private side of the development. Does that answer your question?
I think so, thank you.
So I'd like to go back to
Sure.
that. So you had said that we were, with the 20-year brownfield TIF, 100 million from real property tax, 15 million generated from sales tax split. What I then understand when I see this is pro rata split of that $15 million. So
Well, pro rata split of all of the local option sales tax that's available to the city until they get to 15 million. Does that make sense? So there's gonna be a point at which time the new sales tax increment that they generate from all of the retail that they plan to build down there, there's gonna be a point in time at which it hits $15 million for them, and then they're cut off. And then any new and additional sales tax revenue from the local option sales tax is retained by the city and split into the Affordable Housing Fund. So that's sort of the recap for the basics of the TIF. I want to sort of talk and to make sure that we spend a little bit of time before we get into the Chattanooga Housing Authority pieces, just to make sure that we also spend some time talking about just sort of how we have this set up in terms of being able to enter into intergovernmental agreements with the Chattanooga Housing Authority as well as with the county for portions on the school pieces. But before we sort of get into that, I wanted to see if anyone had any additional questions about the first few slides.
On the property tax,
Yes, sir.
what's the cap on to the TIF, to the developer?
It's $100 million total between the city and the county. Okay, so that's their cap for the developer.
On the sales tax, I mean, on the property,
On the property tax, and that's.
100 mil,
Yes, sir,
and then 15 million on top of that through the sales.
through the sales tax. That's
So
right.
it's a potential 115 million.
It's 115 million, and that's capped at 115.
Okay.
Any additional questions on the first part? Betsy, you wanna jump in, or you wanna wing it for Mark?
Yeah.
Okay. This is Betsy Knotts. She works she serves as external counsel for the city on TIFs. And she formerly worked in the state comptroller's office over local finance. And so now she works for Bass, Berry Sims. So, Betsy?
Is there a clicker or?
No, but you can
Right.
just. And I'll just move through the slides.
Okay, sounds good. Nice to meet everyone. All right, so we essentially put together an 8-slide show with typical questions that we think you'd be asking regarding legal authority to do a project like this. Because this is kind of an intricate, sophisticated usage of both brownfield sales tax and property tax, and there's a lot of collaboration between the city and the county. And there are projects not only in the plan area itself where the increment's gonna be generated, there are some outside. And so we put together basically the legal framework for the authority to do a project like this. And so this first slide just says, what are the eligible uses for tax increment revenues when they're allocated to an industrial development board? And I'm sure you've heard Mark give the history of the TIF statute that he wrote and then rewrote many years later. The bullet at the top is the TIF Uniformity Act, so that one is from 2012. And essentially it says tax increment revenues can be applied or reserved for purposes permitted by the relevant statute. And so that's when you go, since we're looking at an industrial development board, and you look at the industrial development board statute. And so the second bullet shows you the industrial development board statute and how broad it's written. So you can use tax increment revenues to promote economic development in the municipality. So it doesn't necessarily have to be just in the plan area. And then you can use it to pay costs of projects or debt for bonds that finance projects. So it's pretty straightforward. Well, I think the comptroller, the former one, Justin Wilson, didn't like the broadness of promote economic development in the municipality. And so this 2012 Uniformity Act came about, and if you could switch, and it limits it. So here is the 753, sorry, I didn't realize this slide was next. This is kind of the laundry list of projects under the IDB statute. We didn't put all of them in there, but there's a ton. So you can use incremental revenues for public building of any city or county. You can use it for a nonprofit educational institution, multifamily housing, public parks, buildings for commercial enterprises or offices. It's very broad, but it makes sense. I mean, you're using property tax revenues for a public building. That makes sense. That's pretty much a general government purpose. And then this is where we get more into what is required of the plan area. So plan areas have to contain one or more projects, which we have here. We have is it the infrastructure for the bend?
Yeah.
That's the main project for the plan area. And then you have some side projects. And it says, as noted above, tax increment can be applied to promote economic development anywhere in the municipality. And the IDB statutes allow tax increment to be applied to pay the costs of any project without any qualification that the project be located in the plan area. And that was the intent when Mark wrote the statute, and that is how it's been implemented and interpreted. So here we are, the TIF Uniformity Act. This is the one that put some restrictions on that broad authority that we just went over. So the TIF Uniformity Act provides that tax increment revenues allocated to the IDB can only be used to pay public infrastructure costs. And if you look at the statute, that's defined pretty broadly. It also includes privately owned parking garages. Here's Mark. Hi, Mark. I'm talking about TIF Uniformity Act, if you want to jump in and, hey, Heather. So it restricts it to public infrastructure costs. And then you have to get state approval, which is what I was involved in a prior life, And so if your plan goes on for too many years, I mean, the whole idea of a TIF is that you have this subsidy for a period of time, you get that area up and running, and then you take those sort of training wheels off and you let it go. Before the Uniformity Act, there wasn't a restriction on the time period. So you could essentially do this ad nauseum, and unfortunately, it could be abused, and you could have slush funds that come up. And so this was enacted specifically to shut that down. So if there is a plan that's going to go out beyond 20 years that's involving an industrial development board, it has to be approved by the state. And then if it's privately owned, so we saw that broad economic development in the municipality, very broad project that an IDB can do. If it's going to be privately owned, it also has to get state approval. So the state has to analyze it and see if but for the subsidy, this project wouldn't occur. And so those are the two main restrictions that were added. But in addition, if you wanted to do something that's outside of the plan area, that's economic development and doesn't fit into that list of projects that I went over, you would also need to get state approval. Luckily, from what I understand, what's planned here, it falls within that list of projects. So you're most likely not going to need to get state approval, but I think we plan to ask the comptroller for his blessing anyway, just to be safe.
Which we've done in the past, even when it wasn't required.
So I think this is essentially what I just went over, but there's your definition of public infrastructure: roads, streets, publicly owned, privately owned parking lots. It's very broad. Yes, and so here in this instance, we have a school, correct?
Yep.
Infrastructure for low-income housing.
Yep.
And fire station. Those are all going to be public buildings and public infrastructure. So we're not doing anything too fancy, which is good. And then, Mark, do you want to talk about the TIF policies?
Yeah, I'd be glad to, and thank you. I'm glad actually Betsy got to lead with, I think, I'm Mark Bamantoff, and I'm actually Bassbury and Sims. And as you all know, you just recently adopted for the second time TIF policies with a couple of changes, and thank you for doing that. Something I spent quite a bit of time working with Jermaine on. Those policies, as you may remember, specifically exclude, they're totally geared toward private developers. So they have a specific exclusion, and it's like the second paragraph of the policy said these policies only apply to an incentive request for a private developer to support a private project. And so it was something actually that, that the IDB raised and questioned whether it should be broader. And we specifically talked about projects that CHA might decide to ask you all to undertake, or certainly city projects. And then obviously in this instance, you are looking at some county projects. I know Phil and I haven't had a chance to totally delve into this, but it's my view that your existing policies allow for the use for these other governmental purposes based on that exception. You certainly, they're your policies, they're the IDB's policies, you certainly could address that when you come back with a plan if you have any reservations about that. I think that as they are written, because the incentive for the private developer, the BEN, definitely has to comply with the policies, and I don't think there's any waivers and stuff that we need as to their incentive, but this is really outside of that. Really what you're looking at here is creating a dedicated income stream for use for these facilities. You could do it through an intergovernmental agreement. These funds could flow into your general fund, and you could do it through an intergovernmental agreement, and to do it that way as well. The purpose of the TIF is really basically to structurally and long-term identify a revenue source and to make sure it's available and legally to support these projects. And so by doing it this way, instead of purely through an intergovernmental agreement, you strengthen the dedication of the funds to do it this way. And so we're basically accomplishing in one manner something you could do through a different manner. So, so anyway, that's sort of our thinking on the TIF policies. This is Betsy's favorite slide, so I left this in. So thanks.
Yeah, this is the highlight of the Uniformity Act, where basically it says once the projects are concluded or the debt's been paid off, that the increment needs to flow to the general fund of the tax agency, so the city and the county needs to return to the county. And that was a big change in 2012. And there's our names.
Councilman Ledford, you had a question?
Yes, ma'am, thank you. Betsy, good to see you
Yeah,
again.
you too.
So we've had this conversation in the last TIF that we looked at. And although it's set at 20 years, if development were to skyrocket as we anticipate, could that timeframe be reduced? And is the mechanism in place for that to be reduced? To basically pay off debt early?
Yes, I mean, that is, I'll let Mark.
Yeah, I mean, that's the right answer. I just, the only reason I'm stepping up because I'm a little bit more familiar with sort of
Yeah.
the negotiations with the developer. I mean, the way the discussions to date that would come back to you in the economic impact plan would envision just what you talked about. There'll be caps, and so if increment comes in quicker than expected, then those caps will be reached sooner and the TIF would end sooner. And so what your response to your question is definitely yes. It's important to know with this development, though, and most major developments are like this. This is a phased development, and the 20-year period is an allocation period. Most people come up and it's really confusing. They say, 20-year TIF, 20-year TIF. It's not a 20-year TIF, it's a 20-year allocation period. The actual financing will match up with the allocation period. You're not gonna really start allocating tax increment revenues until you complete buildings and things like that. So it's important to know. So what you're trying to do is capture the increment as lots are developed to try to pay off the TIF as quickly as possible for that reason. And so yes, that was a long answer to a question that just answered yes. So. That's what lawyers do.
I got one follow, yeah, we're used to
Other
Phil.
than Phil,
We're used to Phil,
concise
yeah.
answers.
We never get a yes or no out of Phil.
Yeah, yes.
So in essence, there's not, it is not constructed for us to operate within the 20-year time frame if we have the funds to create, I think you called it slush or discretionary or ancillary, however you want to label that, because it is structured that, and I know what the plans are from the presentation, is to pay off early, not to run the clock out, so to speak. Am I fair to say that?
Yeah, I think.
Yes or no is fine,
Yes,
Mark.
The answer is definitely not to run the clock out. Is the answer is to get the goal is to get these paid off as quickly as
Paid
possible.
off as quickly as
Yes,
possible.
Yes.
But to that point, like all of the summary documents look at a 30-year period, not a 20-year period for the build up and taper down of this new tax increment. Because to your point, even if we're going gangbusters, the reality is if something doesn't start building until 2029,
That's right.
Right.
phase 5, I think, is
That's right.
2029.
That's right.
All things going smoothly, right? Even if we're going gangbusters, it's not gonna be a tidy 20-year box. We shouldn't expect it to be.
Right.
But, and that also just
And
means.
pay off early, it's probably unlikely.
But it also means that until that clock starts on that parcel, it's all going to the general fund. Like, does that make sense?
That's true, so as the
Yes.
value of the Bend property
Yes.
increases an undeveloped parcel, even so, the value of that does go up. So
That's
we
right.
would be receiving full tax increment on that
That's right.
outside of the TIF.
That's right.
Is that going to be based
That's
on?
right.
We would, no, or that money would go toward paying off the TIF.
No, it is a 20-year allocation period for each parcel. So so in your example, if there is a parcel that doesn't come online until 2029, that parcel is, we're still getting that money into the general fund until 2029.
And the value's going up, so until 2029,
Yes,
we're getting the full
in theory,
tax-
yes.
property tax value.
That's right.
And
What
if
you
that,
said was totally correct and very insightful. The only thing I would add is that it's quite possible to do phasing on the TIFs, that there may, so that as they complete phases, we may have multiple issues of debt to match up with the things that some may get paid off quicker than others, and so.
Okay.
So, it's exactly right, and I think we actually are negotiating for 8 years max for the build out and not a full 10 years, and so that's certainly something that will be an important factor in the economic impact plan.
as the undeveloped parcels sit on the rolls, is that going to be determined by the assessor's office in their reevaluation or their evaluation every 4 years?
Yes, but the developer typically, in situations like this, we will usually give the developer the ability to let us know when they want to trigger a parcel, It's in their interest to trigger the parcel after the parcel's been fully redeveloped
Yeah.
and reappraised by the assessor.
Okay, that makes
Trigger
sense.
the parcel for the TIF?
Yes,
Yeah, that makes
just to
sense.
start the 20-year allocation.
That clears that, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
One
thank you.
question of clarification.
yes, ma'am.
Is it 20 years per parcel?
It could be, yes.
So I think we need to be, I'm just sitting here listening, and it's, in order to be clear, it's 20 years per parcel.
Yes,
Okay, which is fine, I have no problem with that, but it's not just a 20-year. If a parcel doesn't start till 2028, then that kicks the 20 years.
that's right.
And that's a very important point, and the same thing that she said.
Probably
So when
one
you
we
s-
should
yes,
make, so,
Yes, it will be
Okay.
very explicit in the economic impact plan,
Yeah.
and it's.
no
it's-
problem
yes,
with
yes.
it, I just think we need to be clear. Thank you.
Is there a limit on the date to when a parcel can be triggered?
That's what we have to
Yeah.
negotiate, yes.
Okay.
It
And I-
will be
I
in the
think that
economic impact
becomes
plan.
important.
Got it, okay.
Yes.
Okay,
Sure.
yeah, I think it's a great project, I just think we need to be clear.
I think, I'm really glad you said that, because exactly what we need to be in the trigger date, and I always have to tell people, triggering is not in state law, it's something, I just think it's a helpful concept to
Yeah.
talk about, but, you know, that is really key. Most big developments are 5 to 10 year triggering period that they have, and this one is one of the biggest ones that we've seen in Tennessee, so that's gonna be a key negotiating point.
Okay.
All right, I think I want to turn our attention a little bit to the Chattanooga Housing Authority and plans for Westside Evolves.
Jermaine, hold on.
Yes,
Before we
Councilman
do
Henderson.
that, if we're still talking about the TIF, then I've got some, I guess, other follow-ups. I know tonight we're voting on, for the, I guess, IDB to consider the economic impact plan. Is it possible, and one of the things I would be looking for is, I don't know that we've ever done this, I want to see how the economic impact plan affects our budget. Sure. There's no doubt, I'm sure it's gonna, this economic impact plan will say it's gonna raise $1 gazillion.
Yeah,
But I wanna know how it will affect our budget almost from year to year.
okay,
Because we have to maintain probably a 3% growth every year in order to just keep up with our maintenance of effort. And so, one of the things I would look at is what's the impact to our budget if we don't do it? What's the impact to our budget if we do it?
sure.
Because since I've been here, we've approved some TIFs, we've approved some pilots. And this past year, we saw, what, a 2.5% revenue growth. And I'm thinking of all the pilots that we've done, why would we not see more growth than 2.5%? So I wanna know what kind of growth impact it's gonna have on our budget.
Great question.
For one. The other thing is, I would like a scope of work on the infrastructure that we're gonna do. I mean, if we're talking about 5 miles at $198 million total, that's nearly $40 million a mile. That is some expensive infrastructure. I think we need to know what we're paying for.
Well, we're not paying for $198 million.
Well,
number one.
we're gonna
our
pay
TIF
up to
is-
$115 million of
Our
it.
TIF is capped at 115,
So-
which is split between the county.
Right.
But yeah, they have very detailed cost estimates for the infrastructure, so we can certainly.
And all of the monies will be public infrastructure. We're not gonna pay for
Correct.
any private infrastructure through this development, correct?
That is correct.
And will that be stated or noted or,
It's stated in the economic impact plan.
okay.
I can provide some input there to that question as well. We have a very detailed budget, and to your point, it's expensive if you look at it on a per mile basis. Linear square foot, that's astronomical.
When you talk about $109 million worth of infrastructure, well, that sounds all well and good, till you talk about, that's 5 miles.
Yeah, exactly. And so, the problem with this site in general is, there's existing infrastructure on site. And, envision spaghetti noodles, if you will, we go back 100 years, right? And so, obviously, the infrastructure that was providing power and electricity and things like that to the former industrial buildings that we tore down that, had asbestos and everything in it, not highest and best use. needs to be redone, right? So, I think, how many tons of concrete do we have on site?
1.5 million square feet of concrete left to be removed.
Yeah, so we've got to deal with a lot of infrastructure that we have to take away. So the demolition costs are significant, even to get to a point where we have a pad-ready site that we can go put the road infrastructure in. Burying power lines, things like that, running the power
Brownfield
on site.
mitigation.
But we're only paying for, when I think of infrastructure, I think of, well, typically roads, but there's other, stormwater,
Yes, sir.
yada, yada, yada.
Yes, sir.
Are we paying to get building sites prepared?
Yes, sir. The infrastructure will go to the building pads. So, but in order to do that, to get the site, we gotta mass grade the entire site.
Okay,
right? So we put the road-
maybe I misunderstood what
Yes,
you
sir.
said.
Yes, sir. And then, we also have, the riverfront, we were just talking about it earlier. I was talking to my contractor yesterday, hey, I had an idea, what about the idea of taking some of the 1.5 million tons, of whatever it is, concrete, putting a crusher on site, taking that aggregate, using it to shore the shoreline and things like that. It's a daunting task, to say the least, and that's
How much of the riverfront becomes public access?
all of it. So we've got building pads strategically located within that, but the plan is to currently take the river wall. And again, this is why.
Well, so the river walk and the riverfront to me is two different things.
Yes, sir. So it's
To me, riverfront is access off the river to this property.
Yes, sir. And so
Publicly accessed.
Yes, sir. And our current plan is to leave that as public domain. And so when you look at the 9 acres of park space and things like that, there are building pads within that footprint, but a majority of the site will be open to the public. And the riverfront, our current plans with the marina and things like that would be for it to be public marina, versus private boat slopes. And so, again, we've taken again, I compare it to the aquarium redevelopment and what happened with that riverfront and multiply that by 2.5 times. That's kind of the scale and scope of what we're talking about with that riverfront redevelopment. And we've always said, hey, it's bigger than a single developer. This is a legacy for the community. And so, there's a lot of public space there within that realm versus, not knocking Cameron Harbor, but, different than what happened next door.
Okay.
Okay. Councilman,
one
oh,
more.
go ahead, Councilwoman
To
Burrs.
follow up on his question. He made a comment about growth impact. Growth impact doesn't really mean anything unless you're talking about it in juxtaposition with loss impact. As I'm looking at this, growth impact can't be anything but positive, even if it's just 2%. Because we're getting nothing now.
Correct. And
We're
keep
getting
in-
something.
Well, but whatever we're getting now,
it's a net addition to.
it's gotta be, unless because I guess budget is my bailiwick, and what I'm trying to figure out is, are you asking, because of this TIF, other areas of the budget will lose?
No, I'm not saying lose.
Okay,
I'm
just wanted to
saying,
make sure.
I'm saying I wanna know what the growth revenue is gonna be to our budget because of this project. It ought to have some impact to our budget, or we shouldn't do it.
Well, any impact is good. It's gotta be more than 2%. I'm just trying to, I was just trying to get the gist of your question. Okay.
And just remember to that point, Councilwoman Burrs, that again, every new dollar of property tax revenue on the city side, you keep an automatic 40% of. So you keep an automatic 40 cents of the dollar. And then you're keeping an additional few cents to build a new fire station. So like there is, to your point, it's all net new revenue that doesn't exist today.
But the 40 cents is encumbered for debt service, yes?
Yes, but it's not all used for debt service. Some of it is for the general fund, yes. And that was sort of done intentionally when this was first created back in 2015, because I think that there were some concerns that we would dedicate too much funding we would give up too much of the city's portion of increment to a TIF because the county has to hold so much back for public schools. And so it was done in a way to try to create some balance between the city and county.
My point was just that I don't want people kind of hear what they want to hear.
Sure.
And I just wanted to make sure that the point was clear. This isn't going to have a negative
Correct.
impact on the budget.
Correct.
There's not going to be other things we can't do
That is right.
because of this. So the growth, whether it's 2%, 5%, whatever it is still growth.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. Madam Vice Chair.
Well, I think maybe where Chip is headed
That's what I was
is
trying.
that to know what our budget would look like with or without it, because to some extent and speed, the Bend is going to be developed with or without this TIF. I think the but for in this scenario is without this TIF, the speed is different, and most importantly, we don't have 1,700 units of affordable housing coming online in the form of the Chattanooga Housing Authority project, right? Like that's the big.
And the scale is different.
The scale is different.
Yeah. Because
But there will be
Sure.
that will happen, and there will be revenue coming to the city. If we agree to put $115 million into the infrastructure for the Bend, it may have the most beautiful streets in the city, but that's $115 million that we can't put into another portion of the city that's woefully under infrastructure, right? Because we put it somewhere else for
Sure.
growth elsewhere. So I think your point about let's see what the growth looks like one way or the
Yeah.
other makes a lot of sense. So we have an informed
Yeah, we would,
decision.
I think we would just say that the 115 wouldn't exist without the development though. And that's where we're going.
Well,
Because, not to cut you off, but I think to Councilman Henderson's point, will you see development there eventually? Sure, absolutely, right? The question though is it to the scale, is it to the density that they are proposing? Does it have all of the commercial aspects that they are proposing? Does it have the job creation aspects? And my guess is that the answer is no, based on what Cameron Harbor looks like. No disrespect to Cameron Harbor, but I mean, I think that if you just sort of follow and sort of let it naturally occur, then I think you get a lot of 3-story homes. You get a lot of market rate housing that's sort of Cameron Harbor-esque, and you just don't get the level of scale that you get with this development. That's also our position.
that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Let me follow up to one thing.
Sure.
You said, I had a minute to think about it, and I apologize for having to run back and forth. It's tough running a business and trying to do this at the same time.
Really?
I think it could possibly have a negative effect, maybe in the short term anyway, depending on how things fall out. We will obviously start providing services before we start, well, we'll get 40% of the revenue.
Yeah.
So I guess I want to make sure that our services aren't being strained while we're receiving the 40%. And that's the thing, like, I have nothing to tell me what that looks like. And that's the kind of thing that I want to know, what does that look like? Will there be a period of time that our services are strained because we're only receiving 40%? So, and I have no information, no data to base that on.
That's a good point.
I mean, I just wanted to insert, over the negotiations, we talked about trying to make sure that the city wasn't strained during any portion of that, and that's why we wanted to take on the maintenance of those roads and those parks and those things for a period of time until that income came online. I think that's part of our benefits that you went over. I just wanted to.
Yes. Yeah.
I might add too, again, I'm getting outside of my purview here, but as far as the implications of the brownfield TIF, I mean, I think, that's worth discussing at this time, because, the brownfield, I don't think one's ever been done before. This would be the first brownfield TIF related to the sales tax. And so, to me, looking at this from the outside, outside in. I think that's the most opportunity for the city to benefit from the general fund side, because those dollars can be generated quicker. You know, because it's not only just, and this is where it gets outside my purview and the accountants and attorneys get involved, but, you know, it's also on the cost of goods. You know, so when you're ordering materials for road infrastructure, concrete, asphalt, park benches, light poles, those kind of things, you know, those dollars can be on those cost of goods. So those things will come in a lot quicker. And when you look at the younger study and some of these other studies that have been done already, you know, you're getting into a scenario where, you know, those dollars start coming in quicker and then thus reaching the cap quicker, which we're capped at 15 million, and the sales tax dollars are gonna be significantly more than that 15 million. But that is in itself, I think something to really look at, and when we go through this study.
Well, I mean, that's something that needs to be in this impact study.
Yes, sir.
That I have no clue.
Yes, sir.
Again,
Direct sales.
the difference is there's retail, because the economic driver is retail.
That's right.
Without the TIF, if you're looking at a lower density Cameron Harbor 2.0, the city misses out on all potential retail taxes. That's something that.
So let me hit on that, and I mean, that does, the retail side of it, you know, the brick and mortar stores, and even the offices that we're talking about. I mean, is there some data somewhere that says America is returning back to the office space as opposed to working from home? Because I know a whole lot of people that's still working from home, hence TVA is trying to do something with that dinosaur down there, so.
And, I think maybe a couple points on that. So first is on the residential side, you can typically expect 20 to 30% of these residences to operate as work from home. So that's the first thing I'd say is that we are in a new world where residential doesn't just mean residential anymore. And the second thing I'd say is we've had more absorption. Chattanooga is a bit of an anomaly compared to a lot of other markets. So we've had more office absorption in the last few years than we've seen in multiple years prior to that, which has been, we've been fortunate with that. Yes, you have TVA, which is transitioning, and that site will transition out. I mean, it's pretty much where I think things are headed. But we've absorbed, I think, approximately 500,000 square feet of office space in the market in the last year was leased, which is the second highest ever in Chattanooga history, is my understanding. So we're actually seeing pretty strong office absorption at this point.
So what is that, I mean, why here, what's that do to?
What does that do for the,
I said, what is that, like, why here?
I think there's a few things. One is, we didn't overbuild to begin with, right? We haven't seen substantial office development in the market in quite a long time. And so because of that, the numbers that we're seeing absorption of existing buildings that have come in, or that are absorption of existing space that we have in the market today. And so frankly, we're at, and I've got numbers in here, see if I can pull, but I think we're at a 3% vacancy rate. So office vacancy right now is 4.4%. The lowest vacancy rate we've had was 2019, which is 3.1. So there's not been very much of a change. And then it's tighter vacancy now than any point between 2007 and 2017. So we're actually at a pretty tight point in the market coming out this space.
And part of it is, as I know in my district, Hillock Farms, you know, was a big rezoning controversy at one point in time, and a lot of it was retail and office space. And the only thing that's been built up there so far is apartments.
And I would also say, keep in mind that both retail and office is gonna follow residential. And so that's just a very traditional development pattern.
And I can add to that too, you know, we own a lot of office in town, and, you know, our vacancy throughout the pandemic, now we work with tenants on, you know, rent abatement and things like that, you know, we all survived, right? But our vacancy never got below 4%, overall in the marketplace, to Charles's point. But, and to your point, you know, what you're seeing from TVA and other corporate headquarters and things like that is, you know, why Chattanooga? You know, mid-sized city in a no-income tax state, quality of life, affordability. You know, we've got a lot of positive things, but we've got a short window to attract those jobs. You know, people are coming out of the pandemic, they're coming out of COVID, like TDA and they're saying, how do we attract employees back to the workplace? Because it's not sustainable. There are certain segments of the market that can work from home, but we're social people, right? If we were meant to be engaged, we'd be engaged, but we're not, right? And so, what attracts the new workforce? It's the bid, right? And that's what we're building. We're building this corporate campus with heavy infrastructure, with riverfront, with entertainment, with residential. It's a live, work, play concept. The cost associated with that is we're all figuring out, but, when you look at that workforce, that's what they're looking for. They want access to the Riverwalk. They want outdoor amenity space. They want all those things. They want park space. Every conversation I've had with all these corporate headquarters that are relocating from Chicago and places like that, and competing against Austin, and other projects like that, other cities like that, it's always the same comment, right? Is how do I attract my employees back? Just like retail. If you can buy things online,
Yeah, why
Why go to a
go to the store?
it's the experience. And so retailers that have created that experience or that are creating that basic need are the ones that are thriving. And it's the same way with the workplace. Every employer is coming back and saying, I don't want, again, not a knock against Crystal and Talent, but, I don't want Class B, Class C, old tired office space, And when you look at Nashville, corporate headquarters after corporate headquarters after corporate headquarters, all new construction, i.e. Oracle, right? Which, by the way, just a big TIF associated with that. So, again, that's the trend, and I think with retail as well. And when you look at the Canal District and the design and our partnership with Hill Partners, it's a retail experience. Indoor, outdoor music venue, rooftop space, the interaction between ground level and rooftop and view sheds and things like that. That's what's selling right now. And we've got a unique opportunity to attract those jobs before they go elsewhere. And this campus does that.
So I want to be mindful of the clock. And so I just want to sort of summarize next steps. So today's vote, reminder, is not a vote for the TIF. It's just a vote to sort of proceed to the next phase, which is the economic impact plan, which puts together the official sort of formal document that is required under state law, which is sort of like, it's almost like the state's application for a TIF. And then there's still a required public hearing that's part of this process that has to come before the IDB. And then the city council and the county commission each have to vote to approve the economic impact plan. At that point, that's the vote to approve the TIF. That's probably a month to 2 months away, probably closer to 2. And then there's a development and financing agreement that has to be approved by the Industrial Development Board. So there are several steps still involved in this process. But I want to give a chance to Columbia Residential, the master developer for Westside Evolves, to kind of come up and talk about their plans for Westside Evolves. Christina? Everyone, this is Christina DeMoribus from Columbia Residential, and they are the master developer for Westside Evolves.
Hi, thank you so much for letting us join you today. Thanks, Jermaine. I'm Christina DeMaribus. I'm Director of Development at Columbia Residential. My colleague Jim Growley is here as well, and we're here to maybe answer some questions that have come up or that we're right now at the right opportunity to speak about the process that's going to take place at the Westside Evolves transformation. We are the master developers that have been selected. We've been procured by the Chattanooga Housing Authority. And so we're really coming alongside a great plan and helping with the implementation stage. I wanted to kind of back up a little bit and I think this is a great opportunity. We've just talked about the TIF and the Bend and just kind of remind everybody the interconnectivity between the two developments. So I won't go into great detail, but just wanted to remind everyone of the location, which Jermaine's already hit on, but the fact that the success of the Bend really is super interconnected with the success of Westside Evolves, in that TIF generates the necessary funding for the infrastructure that's necessary for the redevelopment of Westside Evolves. And so without that, we don't have the money for the infrastructure on the west side. So I think that I just wanted to touch on that at a high level. We are excited to come in with a mixed income strategy on the Westside Evolves campus. I think you just also heard some of the affordability that will be developed on the Bend. And so we see these developments as complementary. We're really excited to be part of such a great team and so much action here happening in Chattanooga. I think everybody's seen this. This is from the master plan itself, but it is really just looking at that stitching together of these communities that have been broken over time. The master plan really indicates for the west side to re-establish an urban street grid. We do see that in our work across the country. And then you're really establishing a street grid over at the bend. And so this is really just looking at that interconnectivity so that everyone has access to the riverfront. Everyone has access to the same great amenities that Jimmy just spoke about. And now we're kind of going into some of the details of what might be of concern to many, which is any necessary relocation that may take place. Whereas the Bend doesn't have existing residents really on its campus, we all know Westside does. And we all have shared goals in common of making sure that the Westside residents and their well-being are really protected throughout this process. And so in working with our partners at Chattanooga Housing Authority, we made a list of some of the commitments that we as master developers are making alongside the Chattanooga Housing Authority. And I want to explain some of those to you today because I do feel like a really misunderstood piece on this, which maybe has been heard before but not fully understood or explained or enough detail given yet about it, is the Build First strategy. So I will get into that in just a minute, but the Build First strategy is a commitment to create more housing options before anyone is requested to move and before any demolition occurs on the west side. The second is the creation of new mixed income housing. We did speak about that a little bit on what is mixed income and what percentage is replacement units versus affordable workforce units versus unrestricted. But the point here is really we're looking at a commitment to create new mixed income housing for all, regardless of income. The units are interchangeable. What we develop in similar master developments that Columbia Residential has been, had the opportunity to work within, is these units are interchangeable. There's not a set of affordable units over here and a set of market rate units over here. They're mixed in the same buildings, they're mixed in the same campus. Commitment 3 would be providing the residents choices. Every resident in the west side will be given multiple choices, and we'll get into that in a few minutes, but choices as to where they may want to live, both permanently and potentially in a temporary situation while the rest of the development is occurring. So again, I'll go into details in just a moment there. The fourth is honoring the first right of return for all existing residents. I think that's really important to remind everyone that there is this ongoing right to return, regardless of a choice that's made at the time of a move. A resident on the west side has the opportunity to rise to the top of a wait list if they so choose to return to the development at a later date.
I have a really burning question.
Yes, ma'am.
And it's of these first, say, 5. When you're talking about people moving, I'm familiar with, I don't know if you did the project in Atlanta near the airport, but people weren't leaving the area. They were moving into new facilities that were built for them. And so when we provide choices and all this, choices to do what? Get out of the area?
No, ma'am. So that's a great question. And we do have a slide on that, but I want to directly answer your question. Choices are going to be at different stages of this process. So what will happen is an individual may have a choice during a temporary relocation move. That might be, we have an empty unit that fits your unit size and you've designated a request to stay on site, maybe for a social network or transportation issue, a family member lives across the site. Whatever their reason may be, it's going to be individualized to each household. And so there's an indication that that individual may say, my choice right now is to stay on site. I don't want to take a voucher and move. Now the household next to them may say, I want to take a voucher and I want to move. That is a choice that individuals will be given. There's a menu of options.
So it's not a 1-for-1.
No, there's also, so then while we are developing new housing, there's got to be a choice that individuals will have a choice to either move into the new housing. They will still have a choice to take a voucher. They may say they want to wait until housing is developed on a certain location of the site, so they want to be moved within the west side. Does that make sense?
I guess I'm using a different model in my mind that
Okay.
I'm familiar with. You have 100 apartments here, and they're outdated. So you're gonna build 100 here, and then allow people to move. Same neighborhood, same area, same everything.
It might be good to flip through some of the visuals, but yes, there's a one-for-one replacement housing commitment on this property that is published in the master plan, which has been adopted as I
In the
understand.
same location.
So visually, maybe it'd be helpful on the, yes.
Well, let's go to visually then.
YFD site, I don't know what you're saying when you say in the same location, that's why I'm
Well,
pausing.
they've been in this neighborhood, in
in
this
this
area
neighborhood-
for ages.
Right, so in this neighborhood, which is inclusive of the YFD site, so that's how I would define the neighborhood. As it is defined in the master plan, it includes both College Hill, YFD site, and other CHA-owned properties in the west side.
Maybe my colleagues can be more clear. I don't want it
I-
to look like gentrification.
No, I
Yeah.
understand what you're saying. So my
Okay.
question is, there's nothing at this site now that you can go and build right now, that you could go and build in 100, and those people that are in the area now where the apartments are old and outdated, that you can't go to them and say, hey, we've completed 100 apartments here. You can move from here to there. So what I'm hearing you saying is they have to move in order for it to be built and then moved again.
No, ma'am.
Wait,
I
okay,
wanna,
so
No.
give me some clarity on that.
I'm glad I'm here to hopefully clarify. Build first is just that. So maybe we should skip to a slide that shows a visual. And then we can back up. How's that?
visual.
Yeah.
All right, so this is an older, yeah, okay. So we do have, the YFD site. Number one in this, PowerPoint, in this visual, is the YFD location. Is everybody familiar with that location?
Yeah.
Okay, so there are no homes on that location currently. And that, as part of the master plan, has been designated as phase one to contain the vertical first phase of housing.
Okay,
So when you
may I
ask,
stop
can
you
I-
right there?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I understand that, phase one. So why does that have to be phase one? Why can't you go to a site that has nothing on it
That has
and let
nothing on
it be phase
That has
one?
nothing on it.
It doesn't have
Okay.
anything on it.
So,
So that's what I'm trying
okay,
to.
so, yeah, but the building itself is empty, so you saying you're gonna have to tear that down, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then do it anyway.
But there
Okay.
will be no displacement of residents on that site. There are no residents on the YFD site.
I think the thing that the council didn't, we didn't connect a dot on earlier was that when one of these buildings down here on the left, that's not in
And
a
the-
one or a two,
Right,
when one of those buildings comes down, say you have 100 residents that are at a 0 to 30 AMI. When CHA builds on lot one, there may only be 45 units that are
That's
at
correct.
30%, 0-30 AMI. So these 100 people can't just pick up and move, which was the original understanding of council, though we know that within the plan as written, it's always been clear that that was what it would be,
That's
but there
correct.
was a disconnect
Right.
here, and I mean, I've studied this plan a lot, and I totally was
It is
disconnected.
confusing,
So,
absolutely. I
so
understand.
it's, while ultimately there would be a 1-for-1 of those 0 to 30 AMI units, it is not in phase one that every one of those 0 to
That's
30
correct.
would be replaced
So-
each time.
That's a really good point. So right now, the master plan indicates about 120 units to be developed on the YFD site. The master plan also indicates mixed income. That's a commitment this community has made to not concentrate poverty again, okay? So that would mean that only a third of the 0 to 30%, right, that you're the low income replacement units of College Hill would be contained within the first phase of housing. As master developers and coming in trying to implement this, what we are looking at, again, the same goal of trying to minimize the number of individuals who might have to temporarily move. What we are trying to do is increase that unit count on these early build first sites. By increasing that unit count, then you're increasing the number of people that will have a band of units to move into, okay? So not only are we trying to densify and look for financing, which is gonna be at the state level, for low-income housing tax credits, gap funding, local level, it's gonna come from everywhere. But in order to develop the more dense housing on the YFD site and locate other opportunities within the west side of Alls neighborhood that does not currently have housing on it, that is our goal. That is what we're here to do and what we're looking and actively working to do. To minimize, I mean, to your point, there's a differential. It's a math equation, right? Like, if you build 300 units, then you have 100 units for replacement housing in the first phase or two. But you gotta finance the 300 units. It's, right now we're looking between 120, which was indicated in the master plan, and maybe we can get to 220 on the YFD site. I mean, we're still in early stages of looking and penciling this out. But we're also looking, like we said, for other opportunities in the West Side neighborhood in addition to the YFD site, to try to activate as many sites first and early so that we have one-time moves. That's the goal. Yes, ma'am.
Madam Chair?
Oh, yes, ma'am.
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, so I want to address another question that I had asked last week. It was stated to me that they would only be allowed to move back in if they qualify. And so qualify is just too broad for me, so I asked exactly what do you mean qualify? And I was told that they would have to be in good standards. So what does good standards mean?
They need to maintain their existing lease, is my understanding.
Well,
Okay,
so Betsy, if I'm not mistaken, what did you tell me in reference to that?
Yeah, everybody will have a right to return. Anybody who's been displaced who live in one of the targeted units for demolition, if they are tenants in good standing. And what that means is, if they go off-site and they have a lease either with the CHA or with, say, a HCBP landlord, they must be in good standing. They gotta make sure that they pay their rent on time, or they're up to date with their rent, they don't violate the lease violations.
it's lease violation.
So, that's what
Okay,
that means.
so you were saying they couldn't have been late at any time, is that correct?
I didn't say they couldn't be late. I said they have to basically be in compliance with their lease. So if they're 30 days late and they catch up, it's gonna be a case-by-case basis.
Okay, so, but being 30 days late, for whatever reason, you never know what a person's
Yeah.
issue is or why
Right,
they were 30
right.
days
And-
late. So I was under the impression that if they were late, or if they had an issue with their income or finances, then they would not be allowed to come back. So, and that's, once again, that's where it didn't sit well with me. Would they have been, without this property being renovated, would they have been allowed to stay if they have had financial issues before in their apartment where they are now?
And they will if they move off-site and they desire to come back. Every single one of the families, everyone, whether they move into new units or whether they move off-site, will have a case manager assigned specifically to that family, who will work with the family. So if the family is getting late, that case manager will help the family maintain their lease agreement. So I think you're the one that said if they're late for more than a month, they're not gonna be able to come back. That didn't come out of my mouth. What I said is we're gonna have to deal with families on a case-by-case basis, because we're not in the business of keeping families off. We're here to welcome families back, and every family's
And I
different.
want to clarify too, the commitment for one-to-one replacement, I mean, it doesn't benefit anybody to say, now you can't move in. The unit will be there and it will be reserved, it will be it's deed recorded, it's a deed restriction. So there's no way that these units will be required to be there for people who make a certain income band for the replacement units. Do you see what I'm saying? So it's not like if somehow we figure out a way to disqualify certain individuals that we wouldn't build the housing will still be there. It's waiting for those occupants.
So there will be residents that have to move off of this site for a period of time.
There could potentially be residents that would have to move out. We came in about 2 months ago, and so we're working to pencil out things and apply for funding. And
Why would
like
you
I
say
said,
potentially as opposed to there will be?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
if we are able to find enough off-site housing and build first, which is the committed strategies, when we were procured, we were told that that is the strategy that CHA intends to follow. And so our job is to do our best to follow that. It's our intention to activate sites that don't currently have housing on it in an effort to not have that. But will it happen? It could.
Can I say,
Absolutely.
there's two other things that we didn't get to the slide, but that mitigate that. One is there's opportunity to move, the housing authority has a lot of buildings in the west side. So it's opportunity to move temporarily within the west side and never leave the west side, which is what we have understood in our few days here is really important for residents. And secondly, residents have choices. So part of the thing that works with the math is resident choices. And so one of the slides shows what was learned out of the master planning of what resident choices were at least anticipated to make based on their survey in 2020. So there's several levers that can assure that people don't have to move against their will that are part of this. It's not just but the build first is absolutely the thing that's going to help it the most. Is the more units we can build early, the more options there are for people to move directly into new housing.
So maybe to clarify on that point, as master developers, we're coming in, we're trying to explain our process and what we've seen across our other developments in the southeast. I think Betsy, CHA has currently put out a procurement for a relocation specialist.
Yes, it went out yesterday.
Okay, so there'll be a professional group that will come in that will take, what we have right now is one data point that was done. It was a robust survey work that was done during master planning in 2020. This is part of the master plan. From a snapshot in time, this is indicating that approximately 25% of College Hill residents do not want to leave the site. We don't know if that number will go up, if that number will go down, but what we do know is that a professional group will be engaged to not just do to not do a survey, but to individually do household data forms and understand exactly what each family may need at the time relocation may be necessary, and give them the whole menu of choices. And it may be you have an option to move into the new housing, you have an option to take a voucher, or you can move and wait for a future phase of housing. There'll be options provided to each family because each family's gonna have their own unique set of circumstances.
So real quick, my issue has been and always will be, moving people off the site. And I've expressed that to you all, expressed that to the Housing Authority. So what I would like to see, because I don't want to belabor the point, what I would like to see is the current number of, we're gonna call them legacy residents, that want to remain on that site. I want to see the actual percentage of College Hill, specifically College Hill residents. The actual, I don't need names or anything, because I know we've discussed fair housing and all those things. I want to see the actual percentage of people that want to stay, because it's 2020. I want to see an accurate 2023 number of those who want to stay, the percentage, and the actual number of doors, because I believe, and the type of doors. If it's 3 bedrooms,
1, 2,
2, 3 bedrooms, whatever the case is. And I think that would be very helpful in us understanding, or help me understanding, or being more supportive of this project. Because I understand there are people, like I said, during campaigns and canvassing, I know there are people that want to leave. I know that from directly talking to residents. They say, hey, get my voucher, I'm out of here. Fine. There are those who just, gonna naturally leave for whatever reason they want to leave for. But then you have a core group. It's not a huge group, but it is a core group of residents that want to stay. They've been there 5-10 years, and they want to stay. You'll know who those residents are. We don't need names, of course, we can't have them, but I would like to see a 2023 number of those residents, and I would like to see that within our economic impact plan. Because and I understand that it may change. It may be, let's say 2023 you do it, and 2025 y'all go back and do it again and numbers change. Well, we will know based on when you did it in 2023, this is what y'all built for. This is what you built first for. You built first for, you can't guarantee certain things, but you built first knowing this is the data number. This is the number that we are working with. Now, if, like I said, in 2025, 26, whatever, you go back and do it again, number change, can't control that. But what we can control is what we do today. And I think that data set, that number is going to be core and important for support for this project for me. Because to me, it's like a smoke screen. They've been selling wolf tickets, people been used to get all this data and do all these things, and now all of a sudden they are, in essence, seem like they're being disposed of. Now, okay, we got what we need. Let's get the money and run on. And that's not maybe, that may not be how you, not you, because I know y'all just got here, of course, but that may not be, you know, the thought pattern over there, but that from a public standpoint, that's what it's viewed as. It's viewed as, we as a council approved the project that said 1-for-1 build first. Cool, people don't have to leave. Wonderful project. Then got the bend in, got a school in or center in, education center in. Cool, this is great. And now we're coming back and saying, well, some people may have to be relocated because down 40% of the units have to be this. Well, that's not, regardless of what's in the plan that was given to us or presented to us, these were not high notes that we understood from the beginning or were presented at the beginning, and it puts us in a tough spot to explain to our constituents now, well, why did you approve it if you knew this? Well, why wasn't it presented or given to us in context? We got the content, but we didn't get the context of what was actually meant. And so that is a very hard point for me personally, because these are my constituents. This is in District 7. These are my constituents. These are my voters, my residents I care about. And so I don't want them to be viewed as, you know, now all of a sudden it's this great project and they're getting pushed out, but they were a part of the process to get the funding, part of the process to get the data, and now they're not going to be able to do that. Or, they got the first right to return, but I don't know if anybody else has moved, but people don't try to move back and forth all the time. That's a lot to do, especially when you look at the legacy residents that may be older, that may be, may have some mental or some physical ailments or disabilities. Those are the people, when I talk about legacy residents and core residents, that's those, because it's a housing project. It's a project. Projects end. And so we understand that, and housing projects were not built for people to live there 2, 3, 4, 5 generations. However, when you have people there, which is an actual small segment, then let's protect them and advocate for them. So that's where I am. So that's what I would like to see, and that's my.
Can I just add one thing to what you're saying? So, as a researcher, my problem with this is, if you go through that area, it would be very, based on some of the things you said, it would be very, in 2020 with a questionnaire, I'm surprised that not more than 75% said, I want to get out of here. Because it's, as you said, they're 40 years old, they're not.
They weren't built for
Yeah,
for a long
so I think that's faulty research. The research would have to be, do you want to get in or stay in the area when it's redone? Okay, that's where I'm, so,
It's different. It's
so,
totally
so I'm
different.
listening to research that
That
says,
question was
Totally
asked.
different.
Yeah,
This is a
it's
snapshot, there's a
I
full.
can't imagine 70%
With
would
the
leave
leave,
after we make this big, beautiful
thank you.
place.
No,
So, no, I'd rather live
so I
in
just
the
want to,
No, I think it's really, maybe I didn't do a good job of explaining it. 25% of individuals said they wanted to stay on site while the housing was coming.
that
So-
isn't what I'm talking
Well,
about.
I think it's important to recognize that even if 75% of people say I'm out, we're still building the units for 100% of those individuals to come back. So it's not, that does not affect the unit mix that's being built.
And the question was asked, question 5.1, if College Hill and/or Gateway is redeveloped and you need to be relocated, are you interested in returning to the redeveloped site? And 65.5% of people said, yes, I want to return. And 18.8 said, I would need more information. So
Right.
you've
And
got,
we're building
about
for
Okay.
100%
yeah,
to
you've got
return.
about 80% of people who are saying, even if I have to move away, I want to come back.
This was
potentially.
specific to during the construction activity.
Right.
If you giving the following options, and we had about, so I'm looking for that target group of let's call them legacy, renter, you've used the term. But, there, in any development, you've got those that have been very engaged in the master planning, and to your point, shown to the meetings, provided input. And so right now, the data point we have is 25%. To your point, let's update it. I understand.
So you have 65%, if that's true, that want to return to an updated area. And so are those the data you're using for what you're building? Because, let me finish, because if you're going to use mixed-use development, then that's a heck of a lot of building till they can return. And is there been a timeline? The whole idea is a good one. I'm not knocking the idea. But I don't want smoke and mirrors. The whole idea is to refurbish the area, do some social engineering, which is what this is, and that's cool. It's the timeline. If you give people vouchers and move them out to wherever you're moving them, and they stay gone long enough, then chances are very poor that they'll return. And that's also a form of social engineering. Social engineering is not a bad thing. It's that some of the stuff that's being tossed out is, the Ben stuff, great. I'm all for it. This, I'm still a little on tilt, not what you're doing. What you do is a good job. It's the numbers and the research that's being used to back up why we're doing this without looking at timelines. That's all I'm saying. This isn't an anti-anything. What you want to do is, I think, well, never mind, you know what you want to do.
No, I
But,
hear
but,
you.
but,
If an individual is moved off-site temporarily, or they even elect to take a voucher, how do we, I mean, I didn't get to all the slides, which is
well,
fine, but
you
there's a
build beautiful
commitment.
stuff. I'm aware of what you do. That's not what I'm saying.
Well, right, and so I'm sorry, I think what we're trying to say is that does take constant communication, and this is not the first engagement that we've had in particular in doing this type of work, but you're right, it does take concerted effort to continue to have a relationship with residents, even if they took a voucher and they've moved somewhere, to say, we're coming up on phase 3, you have an option to come back right now, and by the way, that option is preserved until every single phase is done, and we're gonna continue communicating with you, and if you want to move back, we actually pay for you to move back. We're paying the connection fees, the moving costs, we do that, and so I think, I hear you, and I know what you're saying, if someone's outside though for too many years, what if they decide not to come back? And that's a new form.
Has there been research to show that for all these vouchers, there's places for these people to go?
No.
May I respond to that?
Sure.
Yeah, so this is, please, I think you need to do all of this stuff thoughtfully, that's
Right.
all.
And as you all know, we're applying for the Choice Neighborhood Grant, hopefully in January of 2024. The Choice Neighborhood Grant requires us to employ the engagement services to work directly with the residents. So let's say a resident elects the voucher, to Ms. Dotley's point, they want to get off. And let's say 4 years down the road, they had moved home toward mama and they want to come back. They have a period of up to 8 years to elect to come back. And we consistently have to track those families for 8 years under the CNI grant parameters. And so they may decide, we'll keep them on the list, and if in year 7 they said, I want to come back, well, before we go to anyone from the outside, we'll circle back to that family and offer them that opportunity. It's a requirement.
Can I just go back to the build first too, because, excuse me, I'm Christine's colleague, Jim. The build first was fundamental. We watched this plan get developed, and we work in a lot of different places. It's exemplary about Chattanooga's plan. But what it means is, you've got to build more early, so you can make the choices as broad as possible for people to make one move if they choose to stay on site. The off-site is either their individual choice that they're not forced to make, or it's a last resort. There's many other resorts inside the west side that you have to work with. And so what we have to do, one of the things in the consequence is, we can build more housing, it takes longer, so that means longer till the first move. But that's important to understand because it's gonna take, the financing in these kind of projects put years to get together, and then you have to build it, and that's the first time anybody's gonna move. And we could say, we're gonna build more before the first person has to move because we're respecting their choices. And we're on board with that, with the plan that was developed. And it's complicated, but I believe that the team, the Housing Authority, and we working with them have the levers to make sure that the wishes for those residents can occur. It's hard to say exactly how it's gonna be because there's so many variables, but we may have to build 2 phases of housing before the first person moves, so everybody has that choice. But that's the reality of it.
That's fine,
And
that's
so
fine.
with that-
Okay, that's a whole different story, what you just said. It doesn't, I mean, what you just said is totally different from what has been presented to us from day one. Now, let me say this. Voucher, the voucher is not sitting well with me. To me, if you wanted to be fair and impartial when you did the survey, when you talked to the people, when you went to them, I think what you should have said or done is say, we are going to rebuild, you're going to have a new place to live, you're going to be able to move into. At that point, if anyone should have said, I don't want to live over here, then would have been the ideal time to say, okay, well, we can give you a voucher and you can move, where would you like to live? But to throw the voucher out there, to say that 3 years, 4 years down the road, you can get where you need to be. The water has been muddied. It's just muddy for me. It's nothing clear on it for me, because it seems like to me everything that has been said and done is to keep them from coming back instead of encouraging them to go into an area that they have been forever, that they can have air conditioned or larger rooms or energy efficient or nicer places. Then if anyone say you're gonna move from here, yeah, but you don't tell me I'm gonna get this new one here, most of anyone would stay. I mean, offer them the voucher after someone says to you that I don't want to stay over here. Then you can say, okay, then you have another option. You have 2 more options here. But don't place it out there first. Because to me, that is, it's muddy the water. It's putting them in an area that say, boom, you can move. It's putting everything in favor of to get them away from. And that's where my issue comes with it. It's just the housing part is just messed up for me. It's really messed up.
Well, I apologize if it wasn't clear. Anything we're talking about building is on site in the west side as part of the plan. So that option is created in the west side.
And I get.
And the move, and the choice to move is exactly when you said.
Exactly when
Councilwoman,
you're saying it.
It's when there's the housing is here. The housing is built before there's the first moves, and then there's
They're
counselors
given
that
the
work with
options.
folks and say, it's right here across the street, or you have other options.
Okay, so if they weren't given an object with the survey, you threw the voucher out there, is what I'm saying. It's not totally my district, but it's my people.
Sure.
And my people have been done bad for so many years and have come in the back door on them so many times, have saying, we're going to do this, we're going to give you this, we're going to give you that. And I don't know of any of my people that want anything for free. Not any of us. They want to pay their way. That's what they want to do. But my thing is this, to come at it that way so that a box can be checked for you to go to your next phase and what needs to be done, does not work for me. I mean, it was said to me that people move every 2 years. Those people like Madam Chair said, go back and redo it. And I would ask, I can't tell you to do that, but I would ask that you not even mention vouchers. Just go in and say, if you have an opportunity, we're going to rebuild and you move, would you like to stay here? Are you happy with going into a new unit or better unit? And if it's 10 of them that say, I don't even want to stay over here, I don't have no problem with them. Godspeed, we bless you. Where you want to go? We'll help you get there. Bring you a truck, 2 men in a truck, or Uber, whatever you need. We'll get you there. Okay? But to come and continue to muddy the water and to plant in their mind that they only have this choice to do this or do that. Who's to know 3 years from now, everybody living paycheck to paycheck, who would even have money to move again? To pay utility or to whatever it is. But I mean, my thing is, it's not right to me. Now, I don't know about the rest of my council family, but for me, it's not right.
So real quick, so we do have a 3:30 agenda session, so we're gonna have to wrap this on up. Jermaine, do you have any closing thoughts before we adjourn from this?
Yeah, so the only thing that I was gonna say is, Councilwoman Noel, I hear what you're saying about the sort of the engagement piece of this. And I can't really speak to that. The administration wasn't involved in the engagement. From our perspective, this is an unprecedented investment into affordable housing, period, full stop. And so when you look at what is proposed in terms of the amount of resources that is dedicated to the Chattanooga Housing Authority for the execution of Westside Evolves, you are talking, if the developers are successful at meeting their goals, you're talking about numbers in excess of $80 million. That kind of investment has never been invested in the West Side. I mean, if I'm wrong, you tell me that I'm wrong. But I don't know of a time when that level of resources has ever been invested into the sort of the revitalization of a community that had such high levels of entrenched poverty. And so from the administration's perspective, that is the position that we are coming from, is we didn't choose how the engagement happened, but we saw an opportunity to create a more equitable outcome. And that is what we are pursuing. And that's where we're coming from.
Well, it's at the expense of, okay, it might be at 80 million, but it is at the expense of the lower income.
Well, that's not something that the administration is choosing to do. And
Right.
again, to Christina's point, they are deed restricted to provide 629 units of housing for people who are at, is it 0 to 30% AMI? So all of those units will continue to be there in the future Westside Evolves. Now, I think what you're getting at is, yes, there is clearly, there could be a hardship on people. I'm not disputing that, but what I'm saying is that in terms of creating the housing and creating the 629 units, plus additional units for workforce housing, for people at 31 to 60% AMI, and then additional units for people at 60 to 80% AMI, there has not been an investment like this into that level of housing in a long time. And I would challenge you or anyone else to tell me differently. And so yes, I hear where you're coming from, but I think from the administration's perspective, we simply looked at this whole development as a way to sort of create one West Side, a West Side that was connected, and a West Side in which we were able to put resources into a place that has had entrenched poverty, that has not had resources in a long time. That's where we're coming from.
Well, you know, the backdoor mentality is there, and it has been there, and it's continued to be there, and I see it now. So, hey.
So thank y'all so much for this passionate discussion. We will head out to our 3:30 agenda session. What is on our agenda session if you have additional questions?